So I just started recording. All I've really done so far is I've cloned my repo, this car app W21 Git, and I tried to create a database, but it already exists because I cloned from the project we were using yesterday in lecture. And now I have this error where it's the development, this server is already being run somewhere else, which was in the pry in VS Code. So I stopped that. So now I should be able to drop my database. Cool. But here's maybe, and I don't, this isn't a downside for me because I don't really care about this car app W21 because I'm probably never going to use it again. But do you see how I just destroyed this car app database from the lecture yesterday? So if I step into my Rails console and do a car.all, I don't have anything anymore because I just deleted it. It still like sees that this is a thing, but I don't have any cars.
So I kind of ran into something similar to that yesterday when I was working on the homework. And what I was finding was that through kind of like troubleshooting and trying to get all the CRUD actions of creating and deleting different, different users, once I finally got all my CRUD actions, I had, like 35 random users that I had accidentally created just from like doing the CRUD actions over and over again, trying to get them to like function right. Where do all those live in your computer? Like what file are they? Where is that being stored?
We'll talk about when we get more into SQL, we'll talk about a tool we can use to go in and like look at where your database, that information is being stored. But yeah, you can just think about it as being stored on your hard drive, like all of that information. And the way how you're going to interact with it, if you want to change anything for now, is going to be through your Rails console. Does that make sense? There's not like a particular file you can go and like look at to see what your database looks like. You need to like use a tool so you can do like SQL calls to go check out what your database looks like. Does that help or explain or answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It was just confusing for me because like a couple times I would do a push or I would do a pull from the origin. And I guess intuitively, I thought that was going to have affected the database, but then it didn't.
Yeah. So yeah, especially like when you're working with a partner and you clone a repo down and you're doing stuff with like adding stuff to a database, deleting stuff, your database is local to your computer and your partner's database is local to their computer. So the changes you're making separately are not going to affect the database because you're not sharing a database. You each have your own individual one.
You just share like the framework, which is the Rails.
Yeah. But that's where a seeds file can be nice, because then the seeds file, maybe the seeds file destroys all of the data in your database at the start and then populates it with the same data. So then that way, when you do like a Rails DB seed, you can be on the same data. Even though you have a different database, you start off in the same state as your partner would. And then, yeah, because we won't get into like a production database, which is like a database that actually lives on the server that you're going to share until like the last couple weeks. Does that help answer? Because, there's potentially 3 different databases we can have. And we kind of see this when we, create a database. we can have a development database and a test database. These are going to be ones that potentially just live on your machine. There's ways to share these, but for our use case, these are always going to, like, we're always going to use this development one, and that's just going to be a database that lives on your machine. And it's just going to be yours and no one else's. We'll eventually have a production database where there is just one database that everyone shares. And yeah, and then you might have a test date. We're not going to get into testing, so we can kind of just ignore that one for now. Cool. So I've now dropped this database, which is fine because, like I said, I'm not going to use this car app, that lecture that we did. So I don't really care that I deleted all of that data, but just kind of wanted to bring up that point that I'm actually, since I've cloned this down and renamed it, that gives me a new project, but it doesn't give me a new database. So cloning and renaming a Rails project, it is going to give you a new Rails project, but not a new database. There's a way to change that so it does, but I don't want to get into that. Cool. So I've cloned my database, I've dropped it, and yeah, someone said I needed to do a Rails DB create, so let's recreate this database. Notice how it's still called car app W21. That's fine for now. This cloning and changing the name, that doesn't either change the database name. But I now have this new database, it's clean. We can just go ahead and keep it like that. What other commands do I need to run if I clone a database or clone a Rails project?
Yarn and bundle.
Yeah, yarn and bundle. So I got to do yarn. That gets all my JavaScript packages downloaded. And bundle. That does all my Rails stuff. And now I should be able to do a Rails S. Start my server, just do a little check to see that that all worked. Go to localhost 3000. Okay. So now I'm getting this error because in this repo, since this is from yesterday, from lecture yesterday, we actually did create a model. We have a cars model. And so we have a migration pending. We have that, create cars migration. So if you ever clone a Rails project that has migrations, you need to run them. And by reading this error, it actually even gives me the hint, run bin Rails db migrate. I could run that, that would work. I don't need to run that whole thing. I could just do a Rails db migrate. And restart my server. And refresh. There you go. And now I'm back to where I had that static page. That's the home. And yeah, I think we're good to go from here. I could do some Git stuff. So Git add dot git commit dash m. No, init setup. I guess this didn't really change anything. If I do get remote, I do have origin. This is just the origin that I cloned down from. If I do a get remote, if I want to see that, I can see get remote -v. See how that's pointing to the car app GitHub that we did yesterday?
I'm sorry, could you really quickly go, what did you type in to when you had that connection to server error?
That is the Rails DB:migrate.
Okay, thanks.
I would say these command, the Rails DB, drop, DB create, DB migrate, DB seed. These ones we're going to run, a lot. These ones, I would say have these kind of memorized, like know what these do. So DB drop, that destroys your database. DB create creates your database. Migrate will go through your migration files and run all of the ones that have not been run, and create all the tables or update all the tables. And DB seeds going to run your seeds.rb file. And those are like the 4 commands with our database that we'll use quite a bit. And yeah, they can be run in order like this, or you can run them individually.
James, could you make the text bigger for us, please?
Yeah, sure. So there we go.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, no problem. Thanks for letting me know. Sweet. So we are now up to date, and you're going to see once we get into a starter project, this is going to really speed up the process. It kind of is just a little slow at the start, just because we got to keep track of all these things. Like, let's just do this. Let's say, for instance, I don't want to push to this remote car app W21, because we're doing, that's our car app. I want to have this go to a different repository. There's 2 ways I could do this. I could just destroy my repo, do an rm-rf.get. That would destroy my repo. I'm not going to run that. And I could re-add my remote there, or I could just do a get remote rm origin. So I'm saying, hey, remove the remote called origin. And now it's gone. Now, if I try to do a get push origin master, it's saying, hey, origin is not a repository because I just deleted it, or I just removed it. Then I could go into GitHub, create a new one, call this, log 21. How do I already have a blog W21?
I think you want Reddit W21.
Sorry, what was that?
I think you want Reddit W21 because we did a blog W21 a couple days ago.
Ah, you're right. Let's call it Reddit W21. Let's create that. Create this repository. Just take that remote now. See, and really what I'm adding is this SSH link. So instead of just copying that line, let's type it out, get remote add. So I'm saying, hey, add a remote. Let's call it origin. I could call this, let's just be weird and call this, you know, taco. If I do a get remote -v, I now have a remote called taco. This is just an alias, so I don't have to type this out. That's going to be hard to type out. So I can now do a get push taco master, because that's the name. I'm saying, hey, push up to this repo, which I call taco, the master branch. We're on the master branch right now. We haven't talked about branches, so I come here, refresh. There's my code. So I can call this remote anything. It's just pretty common to call it origin. But I called it taco here and that worked. If I wanted to rename that, you know, so it wasn't taco, I could do a get remote remove, remove that taco remote, and now add get remote add origin. Let's rename it origin, but let's have it still be this URL or SSH link, I should say. Get remote -v just to list them. Now it's called origin. Does that make more sense? What origin is? It's just an alias to our repo, so we don't have to type out this whole thing. I actually wonder if I could do a get push. I wonder if this is going to work. Master. Yeah, see, that works. It's just I'm saying everything's up to date. And we'll talk about branches later, but we can see right now, you know, we're always using the master. I'm saying, hey, just push up to the master branch on GitHub. Later, we might push up to different branches. Cool. So that's just a little bit of setup. Any questions on that with cloning down, maybe changing the remote, the database stuff? I think we're kind of just going to see this in like different flavors. So this is part of the reason why it's a little hard just to sometimes maybe copy and paste stuff. It's like we kind of do want to know what's going on. Like, what do we actually mean with these commands? So the more we understand these commands, kind of the more power we have. And the more we can, you know, kind of manipulate our code the way and our projects the way we need it to be manipulated. Sweet. So let's go ahead and let's just start with our submodel. And I'm just going to throw this up really quick just to refresh our minds. So we're going to have a submodel. It just has a name. Cool. So it's a pretty basic model. Let's just generate that really quick. So come into my terminal, Rails G model sub name, which is going to be type string.
So for this, since we have all that information still from the cars stuff, did I miss something for like removing the controller and all that?
We're just going to leave that in here. It's really not going to do. It's fine if we still have the car controller and the car model. I think it might help kind of show, we can have an app with multiple models and controllers.
So when you use sub, is that just replacing the previous model that existed?
No, it's creating a new one. So we're going to have a sub model. We're going to have a car model. We're going to have a subs controller. We're going to have a cars controller.
Okay, so sub, it's just the name of the model.
Yeah, sub's the name of the model. Because that's what it is, like a subreddit. You have, and then subreddits have many topics. Cool. And then we can go ahead and generate our controller, Rails G controller subs. So singular model name, plural controller name. Let's just come into our console, Rails C, and just create, just so we have some in our database, so we have some data. Let's create a couple subs. So we have a sub.create, our subs have a name. So I don't know, we could do like we could have a like flat earth sub. So I'm getting this error. PG undefined table, relation subs does not exist. So it's an undefined table. Subs does not exist. That is saying I don't have
Didn't do our migrate.
yeah. I don't have a subs table. Running the Rails G model does not create my table. Let me open this up in code just to kind of show you this. If I want to see in my VS Code what tables I have built, where am I going to look? What file shows me the state of my database?
Schema.
Yeah, the schema. So if I go to the schema, I'm going to see, oh, I have a cars table with make and price. If I look at my migrations folder, I have two migrations. I have a create cars and a create subs. But my schema, I only have a cars. So whenever I create a model, I need to run this. Whenever I created a model, this creates that migration file, but I need to run that Rails DB migrate. Now that creates my subs. And then if I were to go look at my schema, now that is there. So this is kind of like the blueprint of my database. So now I should have a subs table. So now I should be able to step into my Rails console, sub.create. Let's do flat earth sub. And I don't know, what other one? Moon landing, baked sub. We might have an innocent one, just like a JavaScript sub. Cool. So I could do like a sub.all. And we have 3 subs in there. Cool. So now we just have some data in our database. And I can go ahead and cool, keep doing that. So I might want to do that in the seeds file. since I know those work, maybe I could take one of these subs.create, go to my seeds file. Maybe I don't really, sure, I can leave those cars in there, whatever, I don't really care. I could have done this in here as well, like, you know, created some subs in here. But I might want to like destroy all of them first. Oh, it doesn't really matter. Those are kind of my two options. I can use the console to create some subs, or I could use my seeds file. So now I could do a Rails db seed. That will actually, since I have that destroy all command, that's going to destroy those first three I just created. And now it's going to create these new ones. Cool. Questions on this? This might be a good time just to do a commit. Git add dot, git commit -m. And I'm going to have my message kind of describe what I did, you know, in that last little chunk. You know, we pretty much added the submodel. I guess we also did the controller, but that's fine. Cool. So let's go ahead and go to our routes. So we have our root route going to static home. I guess we can leave that for now. And now let's do a resources to /subs. So now I have a resources to cars and I have a resources to subs. So I think this is good just to leave cars in here because we can kind of show, you know, we can have this other model with this with these other routes, can just, you know, combine these together. And in reality, that's what it's going to look like.
What does the resources do?
Okay, yeah, that is great. I'm going to comment this out right now. And what I'm going to do, because we're going to see what it does, I'm going to go to like localhost 3000 /subs. Oop, I get an error. Got to start my server. Okay, so my servers probably should be running. I'm going to refresh. I have a route cannot be found. Like no route matches get /subs. I have all those cars routes that we did yesterday, but I don't have a subs route. I'm going to do, well, let's do a get. Let's just kind of review our syntax here. I'm going to do a get to /subs. And that should go to my subs controller. To the index method, just if we're following like our common CRUD actions. This is what we spent a lot of time on yesterday. We're doing the HTTP get to /subs. And that should take us to our subs controller to the index method. So now when I go back, notice this error, no route matches get to /subs. I'm going to refresh. Now I'm getting a different error because now that route is defined. I'm getting this error, the action index cannot be found. Because in my subs controller, I don't have that index method. And I can go to Rails info routes. And I have this route defined because that's what I did in my routes file. So the question was, what does this resource subs do? Let's uncomment that out. And now I'm going to also comment out that get subs and just refresh this Rails info routes page. Boom. Now I have all of the paths defined for my CRUD actions for my sub model. So by doing it's called resource routing, it's going to give me these routes. It's going to give me like the routes for this table specific to, you know, my model I said. Because these are that conventional that Rails knows, hey, let's make a helper for that. So I don't have to go type all 8 of these out because they're going to be the exact same. The only thing that's going to change is this name of like users. That's just going to be whatever, you know, my controller is named. Does that
I think I missed a step on that. So you took out the subs,
yeah,
the get subs.
this is the only thing we need right here. We just need this one line
Okay,
resource.
so you left the resources thing. So resources is the short version of the get command.
Yeah. But I think it's good when you're starting out to not use this. I mean, you should use it because it's a lot cleaner. But when you're starting out, I think there's a lot of benefit to writing these out by hand. Because here you're defining, you know, your API. And as you're doing this, you should be saying, if I do a get request to /subs, that should take me to my subs controller to the index method. And by typing it out, it's going to help you memorize this and really understand how it works. If you just do resource, I see people do resource subs all the time, and you know, they can't explain this table. So there's 2 parts to, I think, this. Either I think that you could memorize this table. But I think the better thing is to understand how to read it. If you can't read this table, you're going to struggle with Rails. If you don't even have to memorize it. If you might get stuck, you're like, what's the route for edit? I can't remember it. I'm going to look at this table and get help. But if you can understand this, that is going to really help you. And it's really going to help because we're going to get into the nested routes today and tomorrow when we have like a has many through or a has many. This table is going to get a little more complicated. So
And so what you had in there before, the root static home, that's not on the table. Where does that come from and how is it different from index?
this root, so remember the root is a get request to /. And so I'm saying, hey, if someone does a get request to /, go to the static controller to the home method. So what that's saying is someone goes to localhost 3000. That's going to take me to the static controller to the home method. And in my static controller home method, that's rendering our JavaScript component home.
And you had to build the static controller as a separate, like a separate model, basically.
Yeah. mean, I could call this taco, and this method could be called taco. If I called this method taco in my routes, I would say go to the static controller to the taco method. And that would work.
So this is how you're gonna create other pages that aren't doing the CRUD stuff.
Yeah. This is really like how this routes file, this is a really important file to understand what is going on. This is one of the files you really want to know what it's doing, because this file is kind of defining that middle ground between your front end and your back end. Because the front end, it's going to be like, the front end's going to know about this. The front end's going to do a get request to subs. And so it's this that's going to get that request and be like, oh, take that request to the subs controller to the index method. So this is where this isn't the controller, but this kind of is like the master like menu that we're kind of talking about. This is where we're defining all of those paths. And that's why, you know, we could do a resources subs and that works, but by typing it out and really going through this, I think it really should help it more settle in how this is working.
So does resources only work when it's a get request?
No, resources gives us this all of these 8 paths. And it's going to take you to these methods. So like I said, if we look at standard CRUD actions and we look at this table, the only thing in this table that is going to change is the word user. I mean, we don't, or I could say users. Or actually, I would just say user.
Well, I guess when I'm looking at this table and I'm seeing, for instance, you know, the user show, user update, and user destroy, they all have the same path, right? Users/ID. And the only thing that's changing in those is the HTTP verb. If you're just putting resource, how is it going to know which one you were referring to?
Yeah, this table is this table is so common. Like I said, the only thing that changes is user. So user could be, just think of user as a variable. So if we're doing, I already forgot what it was. It's a sub. I could take user and replace it with sub in every part in this table. So these users would all be sub. These users would all be sub. And, you know, this would be display a list of all subs. Create a form creating a new sub. Create a new sub. Display a sub. So
yeah, and I was pointing out that for users or whatever, forget, just show, update, and destroy, their path is all the same. And what's different is the verb, right? Patch, delete, put, get. Because it's variable, in this case, users/ID for user show.
oh, you're talking about these bottom.
Yes, I'm talking about the pathway. So if you were just doing resources, you wouldn't be able to tell the browser whether you're trying to do a get request for show or a delete request because the path is the same.
No, resources will give you the path as well. I'm going to do a resources subs. So I put resources subs in here, and then I go look at my defined routes. I'm going to refresh. See, it has all of those paths, and it has the verbs. So if I get a get to /subs, take me to the subs index. If I have a put to subs:ID, take me.
Oh, so resource just did all of them.
Yeah, resources does all of them.
So pretty much resource is more like a shortcut to that, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's a shortcut.
It is the index itself, basically.
I don't know what you mean by it is the.
It is the table.
Yeah, exactly. It is the table. It's going to generate all those routes on this table. It will do all of these, and it will also do the action. Now this used for, That's something we have to do. I mean, this is so, I'm just going to show you this. Rails is so conventional. I never use this, but let's say I have a you want to see a really quick way to do CRUD actions? I could do Rails G scaffold. So I'm going to create what's called a scaffold. Think of like model. We've seen model controller. I'm going to do a scaffold. And I'm going to do like, I don't know, like let's just do a user. And then like a user has an email, which is a string, and it has a password, which is a string. I'm going to do a Rails S. And I'm now going to go to localhost 3000. So first of all, look at the routes. So I have a migration pending. Rails DB migrate. Refresh this. Oh, let me start my server. What did I just create? I created a user scaffold. So like all of my routes are defined. So let's do a get to /users. All right, here's a user, email, password. New user. Email, email here, password 1 2 3 4 5 6. Create user. That takes me back, it gives me a message user was successfully created. Email here. Let's go edit this user. Update user. That edited it. Let's go back. Let's do another user like user 2. Whatever. Let's go back. So now I have a list. Here's my users page. Here's a list of all my users. I can show a single user. So user /1. Here's my show page. I can go back. I can edit a user. User /2 edit. Update. That takes me back to a user show page. I can destroy a user. Boom. CRUD actions are done. With one line of code. Rails G scaffold user email string password string. I could go look at my code. I go to my users controller. Bam, here's my users controller. All of these methods are stubbed out. I could look at my user model. I have a user model, not much going on there, but it's there. So what I'm trying to say here, I mean, there's a couple reasons. Another thing is if I go to my views users, like, man, here's ERB. Here's what ERB looks like. It's created all of these forms for me. All of these HTML pages. Now, these CRUD actions are so conventional. If we're just doing like general CRUD actions, and like Rails is so conventional, it can just do it with one line of code. Oh, it's like, oh, you want to, create all of this user stuff. Here, I know how to do it. I kind of know how to get you kind of a scaffold. That's why they call it a scaffold. So why can't you use this? There's 2 reasons you can't use this.
Is it because we're doing it the other way, like with the JavaScript files?
Yeah, that's one reason, because yeah, we're not using ERB, so that doesn't generate, you know, the React files. It's not, they don't have it set up like that, because that's kind of going outside of Rails convention. So that's the first reason. What's the other reason? It's more like educational. How useful is that to you? That's not really useful, right? This is kind of what I mean by, like, it doesn't, like, if your homework is 100% complete, but you don't understand what you did, that's really not beneficial. If your homework is 25% complete, but you understand that 25%, that's a lot better. So the whole point of this is you need to be able to understand how this works. Because this is conventional. What if you want to do something different? Which you will. You're probably not going to want your site to look like this. You probably don't want it to look like this or behave exactly like this. You're going to have to go in and change this stuff. And you might not know what the hell this all means. So that's why we're kind of just hard coding it. And it's pretty easy to tell if you use scaffold, because your code will look like this, and it'll have like this format HTML, format JSON. And they'll be like, oh yeah, you did a scaffold. And then we'll also be able to go in and see your user's view folder and see all this generated ERB, which then we would know you did it for sure, because we haven't even talked about ERB. But, you know, you can always look at this and kind of see, because we're going to follow something very similar to this. We're not going to do all the format stuff, but we're going to do, a lot of this is going to be very similar. So going back to our routes file and kind of this resource routing and writing this out. So there's a lot of these shortcuts that we can use. And I think we can use these once we understand what it's actually doing. So for now, I think especially here, let's just type them out and not use this. Let's know about it. This could be something you could use, like maybe you want to check to see if you're right. You could uncomment that out and see what routes you get. But let's write these out just to really understand this. Cool. Let's take a break. Let's come back at 10:55. I'll stick around for a bit if there's any questions on this. Any questions kind of while we're waiting? How are you feeling about Rails with it now after 2 days?
I can see the overall arc, how it's going, but I still can't recall all the little commands and stuff. And I can see the overall flow of it, especially with that flow chart. That really helps.
Yeah,
It's all the little things you have to do to make it work. I'm still behind the ball.
yeah, and with the things, especially like the commands, that's where I think, you know, using something like Trello that we talked about yesterday, or like Google Docs, a GitHub Gist, anything where you can kind of write down, kind of like just have a bookmark where you can have a reference sheet for yourself. I mean, there's like the DPL sheets that we have. I slacked you out the one of my common tasks, but I think it's going to be best if it's in your own words, because there's a lot of commands, stuff like that, that maybe part of it you get, part of it you don't. Don't feel like you have to memorize it. You can always go back. That's why, like, coding is like an open book test. At least
Yeah. Yeah, that the video on how to set up the environment stuff was helpful, but the way that YouTube shows it, the second you pause it, the control bar and stuff pops up right over what you were writing, and it makes the screen in the background fuzzy. So it was really, I try to make, you know, step by step out of that, but just because the way YouTube sets it up, it was covering up just what, you know, you needed to write down, make sure you put all the right characters and stuff in, but it would blur out the screen, and since the type was already small, you know, it's only good as it really is an audio, you know, how to, but you couldn't write down, you know, the specific steps, because it would hide it the moment you would pause it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say, you know, there's these resources, just as you're going through, just slowly start, you know, collecting. Like, I have a Trello board. It's like this one out, the common task one. But this might be stuff like, you know, you could create your own version of this. I mean, use this as a reference, but add your own stuff, just so, yeah, you have that good documentation. And then this kind of builds up, this can build up over time. So.
Hey, James, when you slacked out the gist yesterday, I think you might have just slacked that directly to me instead of the whole group.
Oh no. Thank you for letting me know. Did I do that? Okay. Let me do the gist. I'll re-slack. I'll slack the gist back out, and I'll also slack if I didn't do the Trello card. This board here. But yeah, for these cards, like this Trello board, this is like mine. This is like a reference for me. So I don't want you to use this as like, you use this as a resource, but create your own. Because maybe some of these instructions might not make sense to you. This is kind of what I can use this sometimes for an example for me. But you're going to get a lot out of it if you write it yourself. All right. So let's get back to what I'm going to do. So we have our resources set up. What I'm going to do is we're going to go through this, and I'm going to kind of use this as a reference, this table, to kind of go through our Crud actions with our blog. And let's just kind of use this as a resource to kind of maybe show how I might use this as I'm going through the homework, or how you can maybe use this. And maybe how we can also learn how to kind of break this stuff into smaller chunks and test more often. So we're not doing a whole bunch of work, but we can do a good amount of work, test it, and then move on. Because the last thing you want to be doing is trying to do all your CRUD actions at once, not testing, and then running into a whole bunch of errors. So what I'm going to do is let's start defining these paths and these methods. So we have our get request to subs index. So that should take us, and I'm going to use this one because we're not going to have ones that are specific to our model, but this is, I can still use this generally. Like I want to do a get to subs to my index method, and that should return all of my subs. So let's go to my subs controller, def index. Can I copy this? I can't even, I'm just going to leave a comment here. Display all subs. And I can mark this as like a to do. Another thing I can maybe start doing as well here, let's also, like if we need to render anything, let's go ahead and start doing our render stuff. And then we'll say render, a component, because this one does need a component. So let's do that. Let's go into our JavaScript, our components, and make a new file. I'm going to call this subs.js. Import React from React. And then we'll just make our function subs equal a function where we're just going to return some JSX. And I can just, list the message here. List subs here. For default subs. I'll slack this out. Okay, so now I have that component, so I can do a render component subs.
When you're putting subs in there, that's calling the file name subs. Do you have to worry about capitalizing the S? And when does it matter? Like when do capitals matter?
That is an answer. That's a pretty broad question. I would say most of the time it matters. Like most times in coding, most stuff is case sensitive for sure. So yeah, I would, this is going to be one of those times. These need to match. And once again, this subs also needs to be in this JavaScript components folder as well. So yeah, I want to say always that like the capitalization has to match, but that's just a general, I'd say, have them, generally they do.
And then why did you capitalize the subs in the JavaScript file for the variable?
That is just a React. I mean, it's more a React thing. This is because this is a component. It's just convention to capitalize your component, the first letter, and then do the same thing with the file name. Yeah, there's a lot of these little rules that are kind of, is it a rule? Is it a convention? I know it can be a lot. So now I should be able to go to localhost 3000 subs. I gotta start my server, Rails S. List subs here. Cool. So now I can like see that I'm supposed to do something here. I'm going to that right page. It doesn't have all my subs, but it's like a part of my step is done. Something else we could do just to kind of get this a little more cleaner. So if I go to localhost, like I have to type in localhost 3000/subs. Let's start adding some links so I don't have to type it in. So let's say like I want to be able to go to my home page and have some links to go to like my subs, or even go to my cars, or even go to my users page, because now I have all these different models and controllers. So let's go to home.js. I'm going to get rid of this props info. Let's just add some links. Because like, remember we had like a users page, user demo. So remember by default, A tags are going to do a GET request. And then for the href, I just need to throw in the path. So this is going to do a get to /users, which will take me to my user show page. We also had a cars page set up. And now we're also doing subs. So here's, we have 3 different models. They each have their own controllers. So my home page, I could have links to go to all of those different areas of my app. Right, because I have like my users controller, my cars controller. So I can just use an A tag to link to these different pages. And now if I go home and refresh, I could go to my users demo. So there's that's going to /users. That doesn't have a backlink, but I could go to my cars demo. See, that's show all cars here. I could go back, go to my subs demo. List subs here. So if I'm on my subs page, how would I have a back button? Let's say I want to go back home. What would the link be for that? Or if you don't know, where do you find this information out? Let's ask that question. Where do I go check to see where my routes are? Like
Rails info routes.
Yeah. If you're ever like wondering, like you're not quite sure of what routes you have, that's where you can go to, localhost Rails info routes. And that one you might actually want to like, highlight this, throw it into your bookmarks. So it's easy to find. So I have a get. So let's look at I mean, I real named this kind of weird, but I want to go to the static taco page. It's kind of, I should probably change that name, but if I do a get to slash, that's going to take me to my static taco, which renders my homepage. So I just want to do my route's just going to be a slash. So I can do an href to slash. Now if I go back, so let's refresh this. So I can go to my subs demo. Now I have this home. I go back and that, notice the URL up here changing. If I click subs, that goes to /subs. If I click home, that takes me back to localhost 3000. So that's what the slash is. Just like there's nothing after this localhost 3000. Cool. So let's keep going with this. I think for now, I know what I have it to do here. Like I can leave this just as a comment. I know this is not done. I know I need to display all the subs here. So like eventually I need to get all subs. Maybe I don't know how to do that, but I can leave that as a comment. I know I'm supposed to do that here in my index method. So let's keep going. Let's do this one. Let's do a get. Let's handle this one, a get to user /new. That should take us to our new method. And that's responsible for, returning a form to create a new sub. So def new. Let's leave a comment. You might even write a comment here like this is a get request to sub /new. This is the get subs. That's plural. Get /subs. Let's leave a little note, like if someone does a get /subs, that goes to my index. If someone does a get /subs new, that comes here. And then this is, to do return form to create new sub. Well, let's kind of do what we did with the subs and just build out a simple form. So I'm going to do a new file in here. Let's call it new sub.js. I can just take this subs file, throw it in here. New sub here. Let's call this new sub so our names match. Sure, we can leave a link to go home, but I think also here, I probably want a link to go back to my subs. So that would be /subs. And then I could say like back to subs. And I'll just leave a note, like I could say this as a to-do. New sub form here. I can leave these like to-do notes. Like I know I need to do something, but I can hold off on it for a while. I don't have to start building this out. I can maybe now we're just really focused on getting like our navigation done. Cool. So my subs controller, now I should be able to render component subs new, or whatever, what did I call that? Sub new or new sub. All right. So we go back here. So I have my home. So I don't have a link here, but I should be able to go to sub/new, do a get request. Get to subs new. So this doesn't match, which is, oh yeah, I never defined this because we're not using resource routing. So I need to define this. That's something I forgot to do. We need to actually define this get subs new, because we're kind of doing this manually. So get subs/new. That should take me to the subs controller, to the new method. Just following this. Go back, refresh this. Home. Okay, subs/new. There we go. I can go back to subs. That takes me to my subs show page. Now, to actually go to my new page, I have to type in new. Back to subs. So let's add a link. So this is my subs show page. Let's add a link in my subs like list page to go to a new form. So I don't have to type it in my URL. So we just copy that. If I'm on like a line in VS Code, I don't even have to highlight it. I can just do a Command-C, Command-V to copy and paste it. I think I can also just do a Command-D to duplicate it. Or maybe not. I feel like there's a duplicate command, but Command-C, Command-V. That's a quick way I can duplicate a line in VS Code. And then I can switch this to the right path, sub/new. New sub.
Can I see your new subs JSX as well? Okay, so you haven't put like a form in there yet or anything.
Nope. I just left a note, you know, we want to do that eventually. And then, yeah, in my subs.js, just added a link right here. So we don't have to type in sub/new. And yeah, I could also put, you know, mark this as a to-do, list subs here. Refresh this. So now I can click on new sub. That takes me to my new subs page. And then I have it to do, you know, I need the form there. Back to subs. But I'm doing these small steps. And I'm just kind of doing this maybe a different way of like, I want to maybe, this is kind of more like I'm going more from the front end first. I'm kind of setting up my front end first and doing the navigation. So I can just keep, but I'm also like leaving myself notes of things I want to do. So because I'm kind of just going through these. So let's do this next one, a post/users. That should take me to my user create. And that's responsible for creating a new user. So for that, we need to go to my routes. So let's define that, a post /subs. That goes to my, that should go to my subs create. So there's the combo, you know, my client orders a post subs as this middleman, this, you know, routes.rb. I'm going to get that request and I'm going to direct it to the subs controller to the create method. So let's go to the subs controller, def create. And so remember, once again, this was a post /subs. And here I'm just going to leave myself a to do. And I'm going to go, what am I supposed to do here? I'm supposed to create a new sub. Cool. And I can just leave that like that. Just keep going through these. Let's do a get to users / ID. That's a user show. Okay. So to my routes, I'm going to do a get subs :ID. That takes me to my subs show page or show method. So you're starting to see how that this route is kind of, it's really the middleman. It's like, it's going to get the requests from the client, and then it's going to direct it to the appropriate spot, to the appropriate controller. So then let's go to my subs controller. So once again, now I'm starting to use the Command P to search files, Command P subs controller. This is going to be a lot quicker than trying to find files in my left-hand navigation. So Command P, search for your files. If you're not using that, maybe start getting into that habit. So here is our get request to /subs :ID. So this is the def show. And this one is responsible for displaying a specific sub. This one is going to need a component. So let's go ahead, and render that. I'm going to call this sub because this is just going to be one sub, render component sub. So we need to create that new file in my JavaScript components folder, sub.js. I can just go ahead and take my subs, copy and paste that inside of here, sub. I think both of these links are fine, like a link to go back home. Maybe I want just a link, not to go to the new, but to go back to my subs list. And then my to do, I need to list a single sub here. Okay. So go here, refresh. Now I'm not really listing out any subs. I don't have a link for it. Let's see in my subs. This is kind of like a quiz. We're going to want to loop over that, but just so we can test to see that we're rendering that sub show page. How could I create a link that goes there? Like, we're going to want like a sub with an ID of 1, right? Or something. We're going to want a get request to subs / and then the ID of the sub. So I could just hard code this for now. So I'm going to do a command / to leave I need to do that to leave a comment here, like need to make ID dynamic. Like I'm just hard coding to 1 for now. See that probably shouldn't be hard coded to 1, but I'm just doing that so I can test it. And I kind of want to show a little error that we might run into. Does this route at least make sense? Sub/1. How that is going to match this subs colon ID. That's the one I'm trying to match right there. A subs and then the ID of the sub. And that should take me to my sub show. But let's see what happens. So I'm going to click on this sub show. List single sub here. Cool. That worked, right? I'm sub/1. That's going to my single sub show page. I'm going to go back to my routes. I'm going to show you something. I'm going to move this before I do wait. Yeah, before I do the new, I'm going to put this. So how I had it before was I had my subs ID this path below, but I'm going to move this just to like the top. I'm going to save that. I'm going to refresh this. Let's see here. Let's go to here, sub show. Did I not save that? Oh, I'm going to do this. Let's try it this way. So that's working. I go to my sub show, list single sub here. That's good. That's what I expect. I'm going to go to my new subs. List single sub here. So I'm on my subs/new page. And that's taking me to my list single sub. That's my sub show. This should be going to my form, right? Asher, I don't hear you talking. I see you talking. Do you have a? Can anyone else hear him? I don't think we hear you.
You can hear me?
Yeah. Now you can.
Okay, sorry about that. I was just asking, is the word new being interpreted as an ID?
Yes. So that's exactly what's happening. So remember this colon ID, this is like a wild card. It's kind of like, it's going to match anything that's sub/. Because I have this colon here. So that's why when I do a sub/new, the new is actually going to match that path. So if I have a case like this, I need to make the more explicit one. I need to define that before. Because this one has to be sub/new exactly. This one can be sub/anything. But since I put this get first, if I get sub/new, it will match that one and take me to my new method. And then if it gets anything else, then it'll take me to my show. So I can leave a comment. This needs to come first because it is a more specific than subs, colon ID. So now when I refresh this, that takes me to my new subform. And then if I do something like, 1, that takes me to my list single sub. This also doesn't have to be called ID. This can be called like X. That's still going to work. Just saying sub slash, you know, anything. This is just like a name. I can call this whatever. I'm going to call it ID though. And then we'll kind of look at like where we actually, because this name does matter, we actually use it. When you do params ID, that's actually the ID you're getting from whatever you called this. If I called this X, it would be params X. But we're going to call it ID for now. Okay, so that takes us to our show. We now have our create done. So we're working here. We can create a new sub. We can go to a sub show, which lists out a single sub. So let's just keep going with this. Let's do a get to slash users ID edit. And that's, you know, takes us to our edit method, and that's supposed to return a form for editing a user. But in this case, it's a blog or a sub. So let's do a get to slash subs, then the ID of the sub, and then edit, because that's the path that we use. And that goes to being subs colon edit. Consistent with my double quotes. Okay, so now I'm saying, hey, if I get this match, let's go to the subs edit method. So I go to my subs controller, def edit. You know, that was a get to subs sub colon ID or subs ID slash edit. And here we want to return HTML form for editing a user. So to do return form for editing user. All right, so let's go ahead and just stub out a component really quick. Render component, you know, edit sub. Cool. So now I can come in and create this component, edit sub dot JS. Maybe I'll just take whatever I have in my new sub, paste that inside of here. Just change this up, edit sub to do edit sub form here. Yeah, sure, we can have a link to go back home. And I think this works as well to have a link to go back to our subs list from here.
Can you quickly explain why you
You're on, you just put yourself on mute.
sorry, why the create doesn't need to render?
Yeah, there's a couple of these methods like the create, the update, and the delete, where we're not going to render a page. We're actually going to redirect, because after we create a user, we kind of have two options. we either, and don't think about this in like code, just think about you're using a website and you create like a sub. I would say I'd be expecting two things. That I either go to back to the list of subs with my sub created, or I go to like a show page of that sub I just created. Like, could you think of another option? Like, not thinking about this table, not thinking about code, just as a user of a website, you go create something, you know, wouldn't you kind of expect one of those two options? So when we add something to our database, remember the create method is just adding it to the database. So then after it's successful, then we either want to go to like list all of our, like all of the things, or like a specific show page for that thing. There's one other thing I could think of that maybe we'd want to do. What happens if you're on a website and you try to create a user or a sub or whatever, and it didn't work for some reason? Maybe you didn't like, you had an invalid email, or like you had an invalid field. In that case, I'd want to go back to the form so they could fix the error. So behind the scenes, what we're going to do is we're going to try to create a user. If it's successful, then we're probably either going to go back to like the index page where we show all of the things, or we go to the show page, or we go back to the form. So why these don't need to like render anything specific is because we're probably redirecting them to a new path. So does that help answer your question? Cool. And that's the same thing with edit and delete. So edit and delete are also, you know, not going to render their own specific pages. We're going to redirect them somewhere. Cool. So if I do a get to sub, if I do a get to this path, subs ID edit, I should now be able to see this React component I just created. So how could I do like a, just kind of like a fake call, you know, with a hard-coded one? I need to do a href. What do I need to add here to this link? So that takes me to my sub edit page.
Just a slash edit.
Yeah, slash edit. Because then that's going to do a get to subs, then whatever edit. So I can save that. Let's save my sub, make sure everything's saved. Refresh this. Go to my subs list, sub edit. Notice how that the URLs are changing, sub/1 edit. There's my edit sub form here. So yeah, now we have these two methods that we need to do, the update and destroy. So let's just go ahead and do our update. So my routes, it's going to be a put /subs ID. That's going to go to subs update. So that's the method update. And then I also have that extra method. So it's also a patch just to get both of those in there. Subs ID, same path, same method. The only difference is now we have two HTTP methods to get to our update. And then in here, I could do, you know, def update and leave a message, to do update. Sub. And this is a put or a slash patch to subs. That leaves us with one more, a delete request to user's ID, and that takes us to the destroy method. Or I should say subs ID. So routes, we do a delete subs / ID to subs / destroy. And then I can go to back to my subs controller. So that's a delete request to subs ID. And this method was called destroy. And then yeah, here we want to delete a specific sub. So going through it this way, like I use this table to define all of my routes in my routes.rb file, all of my methods in my controller. And although this doesn't tell me like how to do it, it tells me what I should be doing in each of these methods. And now I have like a pretty good roadmap to now maybe do some of this little more difficult work of now filling these out. But I have this blueprint. And I got all of that from this table. And you're starting to see like how why I mean this, if you understand this table, it's really going to help you understand Rails. So this is kind of explaining the standard CRUD actions for any model. Because now I can think of each individual methods. Now I've broken these up into their own little parts. And that's always going to make life easier. If you take a complex problem and you break it up into 8 simpler problems. Cool. Does anyone have, I think this is a good time for a break. Does anyone have any questions on this? We've also got all of our components rendering and stubbed out. They're not really functional, but we've kind of got like some navigation stuff set up. And we've got like all of our main views set up. So for a general model, you're going to probably have these 4 components, like a component to show all of your model, a component to just show one of them, a component to edit one of them, and a component to create a new one. We could, if we got a little more advanced, we could combine these 2 forms into one component, but we're not going to do that right now. So let's take a break. I'll stick around again if anyone has any questions, but let's come back at 11:55. And I'll also push this code up to GitHub.
James, when the computer's doing all this, when it gets more complicated, doesn't it slow it down because it's got to keep going back and forth before it does something? You know what I mean?
What do you mean by like, first of all, more complicated? You mean like our code or our database or what?
Well, each time it does one of these, it only does one action at a time, right? I mean, even though it does a lot of actions, but it's the computer's only doing one task at a time. So when it's, you know, going from one folder to the other folder back to this folder to make that, when it starts getting more, having to do more, doesn't it? I mean, if you don't write it the correct way, can you end up slowing the thing down?
Computers are really fast, and there's kind of a general like rule. You don't really worry about optimization first. You kind of just worry about getting it working, because generally, yeah, that's your computers are so fast that like it's not going to make a difference, especially for what we're doing. And yeah, anything we're doing right now, yeah, since we're working with such a small amount of data, there's not going to really be anything that slows us down.
To kind of piggyback off what he said, it does, well, what you said definitely makes sense. And I don't feel like my computer is necessarily doing anything, you know, that's really taking that many resources from it. Why is my computer taking 10 seconds to render the one HTML element subs? Like it, you know, when it's saying in the top left corner how fast the page loaded, and it's taking like 10,000 milliseconds. I know Ash, for instance, his computer was also taking like 7 to 8 seconds just to render for the first time to render, you know, a page. And it's, you know, it's like, this is a local page on my computer. There's no wait times or, you know, like other servers. So that's thrown me off a little bit.
Is it does it like speed up after?
Yes, after you've been through the pages a couple times, it's like, you know, 0.10 milliseconds, but the first one is like almost 10 seconds.
Yeah, what my so a couple things is maybe it's like you run Rails S and then like you quickly refresh, so your server's not even really technically started. Some other things might be like definitely there's something called caching, like where, you know, maybe that first initial load, it's going to load like all of this JavaScript files, all of this CSS stuff. So that first initial load might be a little much. I think something that also is slowing this down is where it's probably has a lot to do with, maybe first of all, your computer might be a little slow, but I think probably the biggest thing that's slowing this down is we're doing server-side rendering of React. So why that would slow it down is the server has to go through, it has to run the JavaScript to create the HTML, and then it has to like render all of it back, which is probably taking a second if it's not cached. If it's cached, cache is like going to like kind of store it in your memory in your browser. It's like, oh, I've already loaded this, so I don't have to do it again. So that could be why that is happening.
So maybe it's also, now that I think about it, it's also having to load the entire Rails like framework each time if you've like exited out of it. So it's having to rail that like 10,000 lines of yarn, for instance, too. And then after what?
It doesn't have to it doesn't have to like add all of that like yarn stuff, that's a one-time thing. What it does have to do is that like it's I think a lot of probably, and I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure a lot of it is with the server side rendering React. It'd probably be a little faster if we used the ERB stuff. But it's going to be a lot more expensive because we probably have to render the JavaScript stuff. Any CSS stuff that we have in here, it has to go through, like run all this CSS stuff, probably send it down. Because this is a little more detailed, like of what we're doing with server-side rendering and React and just Rails in general and MVC. Every time we do a request to a page, we're like getting full new HTML, full new CSS, full new JavaScript. And if it's not cached, that can sometimes be a lot of stuff. When we separate JavaScript, when we separate Rails and React in like a couple weeks, what we're going to do is we're not going to ask our server. Let me just go to the controller. We're not going to ask our server for like a full-on React component. We're just going to ask our server to call like what's rendered JSON. And this is just, we're just going to directly ask for some data. We're not going to, because this is like a full-on like HTTP request. When we just ask for some data, this is going to be a lot quicker because it doesn't have to go build that JavaScript. It doesn't have to render all the CSS and HTML with it. It just gives us back some raw data. And then on the front end, we take that data and we update our UI.
Okay, that makes a little more sense. I'm gonna take a little bit of a break.
Cool. Yeah, it's hard to explain if we haven't really, it'll be more, make more sense in a couple of weeks.
Hey, James, I ran into an interesting problem last night that I was just curious if you've encountered before.
Yeah, go for it.
So I was basically going through and mocking up another project and everything was working really well. And then like all of a sudden my server kind of started like failing and wouldn't render anything. And like I kind of did some digging and it looked like somehow I'd like duplicated a bunch of files. So like I had a channel space 2 and like a bunch of my folders and stuff. Had duplicated. I don't know if like I had accidentally like opened up the project and code twice, so it duplicated all the folders because it can't have the same folder name twice or something. But it was really weird, and it like caused everything to fail, and it like delete it and started.
That was everything like were your models duplicated?
I think it was basically just like the top level folders within that project.
I feel like I have seen that from a like past student. I definitely know something similar. I don't know how they did it, or so. Yeah, I
Okay.
wonder.
I was just curious. I had it working, but I had to like basically revert a commit and then go back and kind of recreate.
Do you know what the
I don't know.
command was that you reverted?
No, because I hadn't committed enough. So it was like I'd done a bunch of work and then committed. So I had like a huge commit.
Oh, so you did like a git revert.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I definitely have. I saw that, but both times, like, yeah, I don't know how they kind of caused it. I
I
wonder
almost think I
if-
might have like been coding too fast and like typed like code ... and it opened it twice within the same VS Code file or something.
that's what it like. Yeah, or like maybe you tried to create a Rails project in a Rails project. Yeah, I don't know. It kind of sounds like you did something like you tried to copy it within itself. But I don't know how you would do that.
Okay. I didn't know how I really did it. That's why I was curious.
Cool. So yeah, I think what we can do now is we have a good plan. We've kind of done, a lot of just like kind of setup, but we have, this is to me, this is like the part, once again, kind of reiterating what I was saying about homework. Like if this is how far you got with your homework and you kind of understood this would be good, because this is like we got it semi-functional. We have like our methods set up. We have nice little notes about what to do. We have our routes set up. We kind of went through this in a way to really understand it. I think we could have used resource routing and, saved us a lot of work on this file. Resource routing would have done all of this for us. But I think typing it out, saying it out loud as we did it, is just going to kind of just burn this into our memory. And then, yeah, we went through, did all of these, left messages, and we kind of just used this table as our kind of reference. So it's not complete, but, I think we're kind of set up for success right now. So let's go ahead, and now we can start busting out these individual to-dos. So I think, the index is definitely probably the one you always want to get started on, because we list all of our subs, and then from there we can do all the links. So I think this is the best one to get started with. So we need to display all our subs. And to do that, we need to get all of our subs. So subs equal sub.all. We've seen that one. I'm going to hurry through this part just because we've done this one the most. And then I can just go ahead. Now that I have some subs, I can pass those down. I don't even really need to store that to a variable if I don't want. I could write this like that. I'm going to have a prop name of subs, and the value is going to be sub.all. Could write that like that, or I could do it the other way. Both would do the same thing. Cool. So now let's go to our component. And let's just talk about this. So this is our controller. This is where our controller talks to the model and has the model. I know it's just this one quick line of code, but there's a lot going on in this one function call. We have our submodel doing an all call, which is doing some SQL to interact to get all of our subs from our database. And then it gives it back to our controller, and then our controller's going to give all the subs to our subs React component. And then our React component's going to take that data and it's going to make it look pretty and convert it to HTML.
Can you go over again what the props deal is, like how props works?
Yeah, so, and props is it's a React term. So that's the name props we're getting just from React. So, and what we do with props is, so if we go to our subs.js, our component, any React component can is expecting kind of this props argument. Because we're gonna, and this will make more sense when we get more into React. But what I'm saying, so now this function subs takes this props component. If I go back to my controller, now props is just going to be this, it's technically, it's going to be converted to an object in JavaScript. So on my props, I'm going to have a subs key. That's going to be all my subs. And then I'm also going to have an X key. That's going to be the string Y. So I can add whatever I want here. So I'm going to have props.sub, props.x, props.nums in my JavaScript component. Does that help make sense?
Is there only one props throughout the whole thing, or is there a different props under each function?
So yeah, props, each component. Yeah, so this props is going to be specific for subs, for this subs component. We'll do this, I could do this with a new sub. I could pass this props. So this new sub is now going to get a props, which is just going to be an object with the key T, which is the value 1. So whenever I run this line of code here, it's just saying, hey, render this new sub. But when you do render it, now that subs is going to have that props that was passed to it. You can kind of, so remember how this is just a function, right? Our React components are just functions. This is a function definition. So you could.
What does props stand for?
I think properties.
So when you added to the subs prop and you said subs.all, and then also another, in addition to sub.all being all of those being props, then you also are going to have the X prop, which is Y, and then the nums prop, which is 1, 2, 3. So you're having not only all the sub props, which could be any number of things you add throughout this program, but also 2 other props.
I think let me explain it this way. So our React component, this is just a function that takes an argument. I could call it X. But I'm going to call it props. So that's just kind of the convention to what to call that. So this is just a function that takes an argument. Really what you could kind of think of it is in here, I'm calling that function and passing it the argument. So this object, this is just an object I'm passing it. I could pass it, 1. But with React, we always pass it a object. And this is also props is always going to be an object, I should say. This is still not exactly how we're going to see it, but I think this is the better way to think of it. Like it's just a function, I'm calling the function and I'm passing it an argument. But, you know, I can't quite, I'm kind of mixing Ruby and JavaScript. So can't quite do it this way. I have to do it the way, and then I also want to render that component. So I kind of just have to follow the rules of the gems I'm using to pass those props down. So that's all I'm doing here. You know, because this is not like valid to do it like this.
So sub.all would have all of the, that's basically making what you're passing into it be a hash. Like sub.all would be an array of things within a hash for each one.
Yeah.
And then so if you were to do like a for each function within that function that you created that you're passing props into, then it would run through all of the things in props.
Yeah, well, let's I'm going to get rid of those other ones because those I think they're confusing. So let's do props is a hash that has the key subs and then the values all our subs. So then in our subs, we now in here should have props.subs, which yes is going to be in an array of our, you know, subs that have, you know, ID, and all our subs they have an ID and they have a name. So that's what that would look like. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, it's a little confusing because here, like in our subs controller, it's bigger, sorry. We go to our subs controller, like this is Ruby, this is a Ruby file. And then we're, you know, matching that with the JavaScript file, but we're still able, like, there's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes where it's going to take that Ruby hash and convert it to a JavaScript object. But luckily they look the same, so we can kind of treat them as the same. So now we have props.sub in here. And we can come up here and like do a render subs function that, you know, returns our subs our props dot subs, which is the array of subs. So we can do like a map function on that. So we can go through each sub, because what we want to do is we want to go through each sub and, you know, change it from a object, which is just the, you know, key ID and then the value, to an array of like HTML. So I'm going to go through each of these and I'm going to return maybe like a div. Inside of here for now, I could just do sub.name. Now the reason I use brackets here is because if I want to write any JavaScript within my JSX, I need to use the curly brackets. My sub should also have an ID, right? So let's do the ID, and let's do the name. And let's go ahead here and then call that render subs function. And actually, just to like format this a little better, I'm going to, you know, Command X. If I do a command, if I select some code and Command exit, it's going to delete it, but it's also going to copy it. And then I can do a Command V. Just wanted to move that above. So I have my links. Then I have my to do where I list subs here, and that's where I'm rendering my subs. And if you get stuck with this syntax, especially with the React, I'll slack this out once we kind of get it up. But now I should be able to go to my subs And there we go. I'm listing out my subs. I have the ID and the name. Now, something else I want to do in my render subs, because here I kind of hard coded these links. I actually want to do this here. For each sub, I want to have like a show, and I don't need to say sub here. I can just say show and edit. For each sub, I want their an own specific link. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm just going to save that. Refresh it. So now each sub is going to have a show link and an edit link. But if I click on like show, notice how the ID is 1 in the URL, but here the ID is 4. So I don't want that. I don't want show to say 1. If I click on show 4, I want that to be 4. So I'm hard coding that right now. We have an ID though, right? Sub.id. So what I need to do right here is I need to use, I need to interpolate this string. So I need to write JavaScript. So I'm just going to delete that string and I'm going to use my curly brackets, because I need to interpolate a string, which is, going to have to do that with JavaScript. So I need to use backticks, subs, and then to interpolate in JavaScript, I now use the $ brackets, sub.id. So now that's going to give me, for each sub, it's going to give me the sub / and then the ID will actually be placed there. Could do something similar with my edit. Just go ahead and delete that. Backticks. So I'm going to want this to be subs. Let's interpolate the ID, sub.id / edit. So now if I go back to my subs page, if I click show, now the URL is sub / 4. If I go to 5 and hit show, that's sub / 5. Likewise, if I click the edit on like 6, that's sub / 6 / edit. So that's how I'm putting the appropriate ID in the URL. Questions on that? Cool. So I would say at this point, our show, our subs, that index page is looking pretty good. There's one thing left we need to do, and that is our delete function. We need to add the link. Let's just do this right now. So I want, for each sub, I want to be able to have a link to delete. If I look at my routes, let's go to whatever. I have a bookmark for this. If I look at the one for delete, the path is going to be delete. So that's the HTTP verb. I mean, I need to do a delete request to subs ID. So there's the path. It's subs ID. But you now see how these are the same. The A tags are the same, like the path. And by default, an A tag is a get. So what I need to do for my delete in particular, I have to say this, I have to make this do a delete request. And how I do that is a data, I add this attribute data/method. So now this is going to do a delete request to this URL. Which matches this path. There's the delete request subs ID that should take me to my destroy method. I could refresh this. Click on delete. That really didn't do anything, but one way I could kind of look at this, I could look at my server. See, this started delete to sub 6. So my server's telling me, hey, I got a delete request to sub 6. And that actually went to my subs controller to the destroy method. So even though it's not functional, I know that's only because I haven't done anything with my destroy method. But it's set up correctly to at least go to that method. Cool. So I would say this index method is more or less done.
Can I see the data method delete you used, just so I can see that real quick for the subs.js?
Yeah. All right. And let me slack out this one because this one's more or less done, this JavaScript file. I think for the rest of these, just in sake of time, I might have to kind of hurry through these. Because I want to get all of these done before lunch. So let's go ahead and do one we haven't done. So we have this set up, this delete method. We have it going to our right controller. And we kind of did our index method. So the next thing we could do, let's go ahead back to our subs controller and now do this method. Okay, so here we need to do, delete a specific sub. Something I can use if we have the pry rails gem install is I can use a binding.pry. What the binding.pry is going to do, it's going to stop my code whenever it sees this. This can be really useful to debug, to test some stuff out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a binding.pry. My code is going to pause right here. So if I go now delete a sub, notice how this spinner is just running. It's going to run forever because I have this binding.pry. If I go look at my server, all of a sudden I see I'm right here where that binding.pry is. And now I see that pry command prompt. So here I can look at, so we're always in our controller, we're going to have this params defined. So I have my method, I have this token, but really what I care about is this ID. So since I set up that URL right, let's look at in my subs.js right here. And I could also show you right here, inspect. hrc sub/5, that's a delete. This is what I want, this 5. And that is coming back as params :id. There's my 5. So here in my pry, I can now try to like figure out how to find that sub. Well, I can use the find method, params id. There is that sub. How do I destroy that? So I could set that to a variable. Well, I can call the destroy method on it. So I'm using this pry to kind of figure out how to work this. So that looks like it destroyed it. If I now do the subs.find params id, I get this error. It's an error, could not find sub with ID 5 because I just destroyed it right here. So I kind of figured out what I needed to do. I can get out of my pry. I'm going to type exit. So now I'm out of that pry. But the whole point of that pry was I could go in here and kind of inspect my code of what it looked like at that moment in time. So by doing that, I saw I have this params, ID, which is the ID in my URL. It's going to be that 5. Why is it called ID? It's called ID because in my routes, we're calling it ID here. Like I said, if I called it X here, then it would be params X. But we're calling it ID. So that's how it knows how to grab that. Go back to my controller. So here I can do something like, sub equals sub.find params :id sub.destroy. And then here, so after I destroy a sub, I don't want to like render a new page or for like, I don't have like a sub destroy page. What I want to do is I just want to redirect to the subs path. And where am I getting this subs path? Well, if I look at my routes, right here, I have this little helper subs path. So that's going to take me, that's going to do another get to subs, which is really just going to take me to my index method. So this would really just go up here and call this method again.
The convention is not to call the index method there.
Sorry, what was that?
The convention is not to just call the index method there instead of redirect to subs path.
Yeah, we need to redirect because we're actually doing another HTTP. It's like if I like threw in a link here and did like an HTTP, like a get subs. It's going to do like, it's going to hit my routes, it's going to hit my controller, it's going to be a full on thing. And you'll see it's going to actually change my URL. So now if I go like, delete, did I delete JavaScript? I can't remember. If I delete JavaScript, that deletes it. I already deleted 5 in my console, but now I deleted that. It changed my URL to /subs. And it's hard to see, but it's like, it's actually this icon, React icon up here. When I hit delete, it like refreshes my page. I don't want to delete this one because it's my last one. Cool. Actually, I'll just do it because whatever, delete. See how it's refreshing? It's doing a whole nother request. Cool. So there is our destroy method. But yeah, now I don't have any subs. So I think a good one to do next would be our new sub. So, and then as I go through these, I can get rid of these to-dos. Like That's done. This to do is done. Probably don't need to say render component. That's, you see how this comment's maybe a little overkill? Render component. And then in my code, it says render component. It's maybe, I think my code is saying that's what it's doing. So I could get rid of that. Sweet. So now let's do our new. So first thing we need to do is, and I'm going to get rid of these props because that was just a demo, is we want to return our form. Because if someone wants to create a new sub, they first need the form so they can fill it out. And then they need to be able to hit submit, which then hits our create method. So let's do this new method first. So we already have this set up. What we need to do with this is fill out our form. So I'll just do that right here. Form, name, let's just do a paragraph. So our attribute is called name. So I'll just do that. Then we have an input. So remember, we're going to overload the word name right here, but I'm going to have the attribute is called name. This is not the same name. This is an HTML attribute, but I also have a model who has an attribute name. Name is the most overloaded term in Rails. We're going to see this a lot. So how this works is I do a string, I do the name of the model, which is sub, and then the name of the attribute, which is name. And then I also need a button on here. When we type equals submit. And then another thing we need on our form is an action. This needs to be the path. So we want to go to subs. And then the method, we need to tell it the method, it's going to be a post. So this is our post to subs. So that's going to hit our create method. So something I could do here to kind of test this out. Once again, go to my subs controller. So that's my form. But when I hit submit, it should call this create method. So I could put a binding.pry there just to kind of look at some stuff. And I will slack out this form as well. So let's do a new sub. Name, sub name here. So there's my form. I can type in my name. I'm going to click add sub. I'm getting this error, this token error. So that one, remember, if you get this, we just need to add this, and I'll select this out. What I need to do here is in my application controller. Add this line. I'll slack this out. So now with this line added in my protect from application controller, when I resubmit the form, now once again, I'm stuck. Like I can see this spinner going. What it's meaning is like, it's still loading because I'm in my binding.pry. And I can see it here. I can see this params right here. Params. Now, something that we didn't do on Monday that we're going to do today is we're going to sanitize our parameters. We're going to make sure it's just it's a little security thing. We're going to make sure we're getting back the parameters that we're kind of expecting. So I'm expecting there to be a sub param. So if I do params sub, like that has to be there. And with that, I'm also going to allow there to be a name. So another way I could say that, and with built-in methods, I'm going to require that sub is in my parameters. If I do something like params.require subs or params.require, like X, this is going to cause an error. It's going to say, hey, there's not a X in your parameter. So there needs to be a sub. And then I'm going to permit within this, the name key. If I set this equal to a variable, let's just call it X. That's just saying, hey, this is permitted, and then it's giving me this hash with the name and sub here. So we'll talk more about this like as we go on, because we're going to be doing this from here on out, where we're going to sanitize our parameters. But let's go ahead and do that as something new. So because we're going to do this a little differently today. So I'm going to exit out of my pry, go back to my subs controller. So we saw our new method, that's working. We render our form and it's able to submit. So now we're kind of on our create. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say sub equals sub dot new. And what I really want to do is I want to make a new sub with this. I want to, because this is going to return that sanitized object back, where it's going to make sure that there's sub in there and it's going to allow any of our attributes from that through. But instead of it doing it this way, I'm going to do it using a method. And I'm going to write that method down here in the private section. I'm going to call this the name of my model sub and then params. I'm just creating a function that is going to do this. And then instead of writing that here, I'm going to do it like this, sub, and this should be a capital S. Sub dot new subparams. So I just took this code right here and wrapped it in a function called subparams, because I'm going to reuse this function in my update method.
What is the private for?
Just do this for now. Private means only visible in class, or only visible to class, which probably doesn't mean anything to you right now. We'll talk more about this when we do a little more deeper dive into classes. Okay, so notice how this is not the create method. And actually, I'm going to put this back in a binding.pry. So let's refresh. Actually, I don't, since I'm doing stuff with my controller, I actually don't have to refresh it. I can just click add sub. I'm back in my binding.pry. It has that new line of code, so I can type sub. So I have a sub, sub.name. What do you notice about this sub though, with some of these values? Like ID and created that and updated that.
It hasn't actually been pushed to your database and had an ID created.
Yeah. So it has the value ID, like it has the keys. Like my sub has an ID, but the value is nil. Meaning, and I could do like sub.class. Like this is a sub, but it hasn't been saved to my database. What it has been, it's been saved to memory. So I have a sub in memory, but I don't have one in my database. So this term memory is a confusing term because you think like memory means like it's been saved. If you have something in memory, it's not like saved to your computer. It's like, also you can use this term when like you say like you have 16 gigs of memory and a terabyte of storage. Memory is like what your computer remembers when it's running. Like when your application stops or your computer turns off, your memory is wiped. Like it doesn't work without power. So what I would say is this variable is stored in memory. It's not actually stored to my database. If I want to save this to my database, I can run this sub.save method. Forget if there's a question mark after this. And there's not, so there's not. And this returns true. So I ran sub.save, and now I can type sub. Now it does have an ID, and it does have created that. So now this is saved into my database. So I could do sub.last, and there it is.
Is there a like summary sentence why you need to sanitize your data? Like, so we already determined that there was name included in subs. That's its only feature. So then you had to do something extra to sanitize the data. Why?
Because if someone like in my new subform, because my sub only has a name key, right? If someone comes in here and says like title, sub.title, or I don't know, maybe I have another model that's like account. And like they want to like trying to update an account. It's just so I can like make sure, hey, I'm only going to allow, these attributes. I mean, obviously I'm writing this form, so why would I do that? But you'll kind of see, like I can do HTTP requests and send random data to a server. It's more, I'm kind of protecting my server. So for now, it's not really going to do anything because we're not going to be malicious to our own stuff. But like if I did have this, it would just ignore that. It'd be like, it would get the data, but it'd be like, I'm not going to use that data. So it's a way I can kind of control what I'm getting.
So if you weren't to sanitize your data and like, I'm assuming in this scenario, someone else on the team is making the form and they're like, okay, I'm gonna put in this weird field that doesn't exist in the model. So if you didn't sanitize your data and they were asking for something else besides the name, would it would it cause an error if you didn't do that sanitization instead of
Um,
just dropping the data?
it causes an error if the sub is not there. Like, and that's really from here. Like if I did X, that would cause an error. But if the parameter is different, it doesn't cause an error. It just filters it out. And the syntax of it is, I mean, it kind of says it in the syntax if you read it. It's requiring sub to be there. So that's like require, that has to be there. And it's going to permit name. I might have other things, like if name and title were that, like allow those two to go through and anything else filter out. We'll see more examples of this as we do more CRUD actions. And then, so once we do this, so this step, we create the sub in memory, and I'll, create sub in memory. And then the next step is we try to save it to DB. Now we haven't done any validations, but this is where we can do like, maybe we want name to be required. We're not going to do that today because we're kind of in a hurry. But this is where we could like say like, we want to make sure some fields are filled out. So for now, we're not going to do that, but this is going to give us the ability, if someone gave us some bad data, like maybe we want name to be a number, we can check that before we actually save it to the database. So we'll create it in memory, and then we'll use the save method to try to save it to our database. If it's successful, we redirect to our subs path. If it's not successful, I'm just going to like put a comment here. We would actually want to render our new form with the sub. And I'll put this as a to-do. And this is so we can show the errors, like, hey, why didn't that save? But we're not going to do that today. We're just, because we don't have any validations, this is going to work. But just kind of showing why we want to do it this way, because we want to try to save it. We want to create it in memory, try to save it, and then handle those two cases of if it saves successfully or if it does not. Cool. So now we can go like new sub, add. It's spinning, so I left my pry in here, exit. Subname here, new sub. So yeah, we are able to create a new sub. Do I still have my pry? Oh yeah, I do at the end. Okay. Exit. Cool. So now we have our create working. We have our delete working. We have part of our read showing where we can show all of our subs, but let's do one to show one sub. So here we have the list single sub here. So I can, that to do is done. Our new is done. So now we can do our show method. So we want to get a specific sub. How do we get our specific sub? Didn't we do this in our destroy method? So I could just copy and paste that, right? At sub equals sub dot find params ID. Let's do props. Let's give this a sub prop and pass it the sub. So now this sub component is going to get props.sub, which should be my sub, that individual sub. So then I can go to my sub component, props h1. I don't need to map over this because this is just one sub. So I could do props dash sub dot name to grab that name. And then let's also do the ID. Maybe I want to like ID equals that, just so I can have this to kind of test. Let's refresh this because I'm at sub/7. Hitting the refresh. Sub name here. Is that what I named that? That has ID 7. Let's go back to the list. Let's go to like ID 9. That's testjo, show testjo ID 9. So now I'm actually showing the appropriate sub for the one I clicked on. Cool. Questions on that? So now our show method is done. So now we could start, we just need to do the update. So the first part of the update is return a form for editing a user. So this we want, or sorry, I said user, this should be a sub. So here we want the sub, right? Any one of our routes that has the ID, we have this because we want to find the sub. Once again, I could copy and paste this. So I'm doing something that is, you know, maybe, I don't want to say it's bad, but it's maybe not best practice, is I'm like reusing this code over and over again. Right? This sub equals sub.find params ID. There's actually a helper in our controllers where we can run methods before an action. So I define that up here, a before action. This is like a callback. So what this is saying, hey, before any action, let's go ahead and run a method. I'm going to call this method set sub. So before any of these actions, let's run this method. Well, I haven't defined this method. I need to define that method. I'm going to do it here. What this is going to do is this is going to do this line of code. So now I shouldn't have to run this code right there. I can just comment that out because my before action is going to run this function. So before every action, we're going to run set sub. Well, what's the problem with that?
You need to scope it correctly.
Okay, yeah, there's one issue. This is actually not scoped correctly. This is a local variable, so this is not going to be visible because remember, this is only going to be defined in this function. I could fix that by making this an instance variable. So now before I call destroy, I call this method. It sets my sub. So now this is going to be defined. Cool. What else is the issue though with this?
Gonna set sub when you don't have an ID number.
Yeah, it's going to run it on all of my actions. So on my index, am I going to have a params ID here? Or I spelled that wrong. Is that going to be defined? Do you see that? You see colon ID in this URL. So that's going to be undefined. And then I'm going to do a, sub.find, nil, which is, that's going to cause an error. Can't find sub with ID nil. So I don't want to run this before action on all my methods. I want to run it only on the ones that are getting the ID. So that is my show method. That is my edit method, my update method, and my destroy method. So now these 4 methods are going to run this function. Cool. So what about my new here? I have this sub equals sub.new. Should that one be the at sub? Or at sub.save? I really wouldn't break anything, but I could do at sub here, but that's not on my create method. It's not going to run this method. So this would just be defined right here. So that's fine, or I could leave it like this. I'm going to leave it like that just to make the distinction that this is going to be kind of its own thing. But now in my show method, I don't need to do that anymore. I can just render at sub. Clean up my code a little. Same thing with my edit. I don't need to do that. I can just pass this down as props.
If you would have run that included on the, what's that one above it that you have, the create, if you would have run that also on the create, then would it have confused the subs because you have a new variable called sub under that function?
It would have caused an error because before this method even would have run, because this is a before action. So it's called even before that runs, it would have run this line of code, sub.find params ID, which would not be defined. So this would have failed. So we would have not even run this function because it would have failed before. Cool. But yeah, good question. So yeah, this is happening before these are even called. So they will run the set sub and then it will call the method after it's done. So yeah, now I know in like my edit, I don't need to do this because I'm doing that with my before action. So now that should be defined. And now in my edit sub, I should have this value, this sub prop. So let's go ahead and do this because this form is going to be a little different. So let's go to our edit sub.js. And let's build out our form. It's going to be a little similar where we have, an input for our name. And then we have an input here. just give it the default value. Props dot sub dot name. Let's just see if this is working. And then also we can still give it our name prop that we did in our input or in our new, which would be the name of our model, which is sub, and then the name of our attribute, which is name. But we also can give it this default value. So this is a way how we can pre-populate the form. You can also, for now, give it a button type equals submit. And I'll have this say like edit or update, whatever. Cool. So let's just test this out, see what it looks like. I'm kind of just mainly want to see, do I have that default value there? So go back to subs list. Go to edit. There we go. Now my edit form has the value pre-populated, which is a good user experience. The next thing we need to do is I want to, have this go to the right path. So let's do our action here. Action equals, what is this going to be? Subs. And I need to interpolate this. So I need to write JavaScript. So I need to use the brackets, then backtick subs slash, then the ID of the actual sub, which would be props.sub.id. And then that's it. But I need the method, to be either a put or a patch. But there's something a little weird with just how Rails is going to handle this. So I'm just going to say this is how you have to do it. So we actually need to make this method a post, which is not what we want, but we're going to send it as a post. And then we're going to add a hidden input. This means the user is not going to see it, but it's still going to be sent. So we're going to have an hidden input. Aim equals method. This is just something we have to do for Rails to kind of, patch this. And then the value can be patch. So it's kind of a roundabout way to make this a patch method. So we're going to send it as a post, but Rails is going to see this hidden input saying it's a patch. So it's going to be like, oh, this is a patch, which should take us, if I go back to our subs controller, should take us here. Let's just put in a binding.pry. I'm going to refresh this. So anytime you change your JavaScript components, you have to refresh to get the changes. But anytime you change your backend, you don't need to refresh your browser. It's a little trick there. But when in doubt, refresh. So I got my subname here. Let's put some bangs on it to update it. Update. I get my spinner. I'm in my pry. Well, my sub should be defined because I have the before action. So there's my at sub. So for this, what we can do is we can do my at sub. We're going to call the update method on that. And we're also going to sanitize the parameters here with that function, that sub params. That gives me back a true. I can now look at my at sub. That's been updated. Cool. So that those are kind of the steps. But notice how that at sub.update subparams, it's very similar to how I did the create. That's going to try to update it to the database. If it is successful, it will return true. So what I can do here, get rid of this pride, just do a if at sub.update. Let's close this off, else end. I'm just going to kind of follow what I did with the create method, where if we update the sub, we'll redirect to the subs path. And then I'll also throw a to do right here. Render the edit form. If there was any errors, this is where we would handle that. So let's try that. I'm just going to refresh. It's the big old updated. Okay, wrong number of arguments. So I did the at sub.update. Remember, I need to pass it the things to, the values. So we'll use our subparams method. That's sanitizing our parameters. So I just forgot to throw that in there. And there we go, updated. Time is it? 12:01. I want to show, so this would be done now for our full CRUD actions. And we've also learned about some new things like, using this before action to, keep our code what's called dry, do not repeat yourself. So we're having some clean code, we have this, we're also sanitizing our parameters. So for our update and create, we're kind of making sure we're getting the right data. And if anyone sends us any data we don't want, we're kind of clear it away or we will filter it. But here's our full CRUD actions. Took us a while to get here, but I think we going through it slowly. Hopefully it's really how this works is starting to settle in. And hopefully this table now is really, really slowly starting to make more sense. And also this flow right here. Because especially this table, this table is giving you the roadmap to do these. And tomorrow when we do this example with the has many, this table is going to be a little harder to read. But if you can read it, it's really going to make the has many relationship easier to get. One last thing before lunch that I do want to talk about, just really quickly, because I think something that can be nice as you're going through the homework can give you a little bit of a break is to do some styling. Let's just really briefly talk about how to do styling. There's a lot of different ways, but for now, let's just use classes like you've used and just CSS that you've used in the past. So if you want to do some styling, where you can do that is in your applications, assets, this style sheets folder. Now, whenever you can create a controller, it's going to give you a specific SCSS file for that controller. Now, SCSS, just think of it as CSS. You can do anything you can do with CSS with SCSS. It just gives you some more functionality, which we're not going to talk about. And just note that although it gives you these individual files, these styles are going to be applied everywhere. It's just a way to kind of help organize your code. So you could write all your CSS in here, or you could do it in your application CSS. Doesn't really matter. They're going to be applied globally. So one thing that like I might want to change is how these are all just, you know, all my links are just linked like pushed up together. Maybe I want some like margin right. So I don't know if I was going to apply these everywhere, I might just do this in my application.css. And you know, just now I can just write some general CSS. Like for here, I want margin right 10 pixels. And that's going to style all of my A tags in my application. It's going to give them, you know, 10 pixels right. So nothing new there. If I want to style like my React components, there's one thing we need to do. Let's say for like my subs, I want to come in here and add like a class of like, you know, sub container. I actually this is where this is a little different than HTML. I can't actually use the word class because class is a reserved JavaScript keyword. So I actually need to call this class name. So if I want to give a class to one of my HTML elements, I need to call it class name and then give it the name, you know, whatever I want here. So sub, now I have a class sub container on here, like a CSS class. And then, yeah, maybe just to keep it organized, because this is just really for my subs, I could do the styling inside of here. Dot, what did I call it? Sub container. Border, 2 pixels, solid black. Maybe give it some margin. 10 pixels and some padding. Whatever, just some basic styling if you want to do some styling. I can now come in here, create classes, and then style them in my CSS. So if I refresh, there we go.
So are you saying you could have just written that code in the users file and it would have updated that page, that same page?
Yeah, like this is more an organization. Yeah, let's just throw it in the users file. So in my subs file, now I have nothing in my users file. There's the sub container. Like it's the styles are still going to be there. So yeah, this is all of these styles are going to be applied globally. So it doesn't matter where you put them. It's just more an organization thing. Like if I have some styling for my, like that's more associated with my subs part of the app, I should throw it in here. Makes sense, just to keep it organized. But yeah, if it's going to be global, then it probably would want to throw it in like my application.css. So if you want to do any styling, I think styling something I think it's good to like spend maybe, you know, 30 minutes on each project, do a little styling. Kind of that's one of the ways to get good at styling is just do a little here and there. Then it's also a break from coding. Last thing I will do is push this up to GitHub. Any more questions on that? So this is, we're going to continue on this one tomorrow with the has many. We'll do the second model tomorrow. But this was good because we haven't actually done a full CRUD action yet. But now this example is like all of your CRUD actions done. Sweet. And that's up on GitHub. I will also I think this video, I'll try to push this video up by the end of the day to YouTube.
I have a quick question. I tried to just pull what you pushed, and it's saying that need to specify how to reconcile divergent branches. Is that, I mean, I know you said we didn't learn that yet, but in this we created branches.
That's where you're getting that error.
Maybe I
Have you
didn't.
been
I actually know how to deal with that, James. You have to set the global merge, and it doesn't. It's not because you have a different branch. It's just it doesn't. If there was a different branch, it doesn't know how to deal with this. You have to set what to do on the global level.
So because I cloned this from a different repo, because I did that, I cloned this from a different repo and then made a new repo. Is that screwing it up?
That shouldn't affect. I don't think so. So like if she shares her screen, there's going to be part of the error that's like in all yellow that'll tell you what to do. And it'll
Yeah,
say
I'll give you a
like
hint.
reconcile it, and it'll say like you can replace the get with like get dash dash global, and then that command, and it'll tell it how to do it.
Cool.
Yeah, there is a set of yellow instructions, so maybe I can try and like follow that on my own to see if I.
Have you also been trying to follow along though?
I was until this last segment, and then I stopped because I got lost and missed, like I had a typo and gave me an error and I didn't have time to fix it, so I just quit.
Because if you're like following along at the start or up to a point, and now you're going to try to pull, you're probably going to run into a lot of conflicts. That'll be your next error.
That's definitely going to be true. So is there a way to fix that, or is it too complicated and not like?
I think if there's a way just to, if you do it, I think if you do a force a get pull, I'm trying to think of the way, because there's a way to do in VS Code to just like accept all of my changes. But I don't know, I can't think of how to do that without going through each individual file, which might be a lot. Trying to think if you do I would have to Google it.
What if I just take all of my, because I haven't done any push, obviously. So what if I were to take all of my changes in VS Code and just abandon them, whatever it's called?
Have you committed?
Not in a while. I did at the beginning.
Yeah, if you haven't committed, you could do a stash. But if you've committed, we'd have to find the commit to go back to. I think what might be easiest, and then this way you would have two copies, is you just clone this repo again.
And just name it a different folder.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you could, then that way you could have what you have worked on if you wanted to like compare the two. Because the other option is, I mean, essentially, yeah, you either have the option of having the two copies or just pretty much destroying what you have and overwriting it with all my stuff.
Yeah, that sounds like the easiest way.
Did anyone else get that when you tried to clone? Did you get that? Like what was the error again? It was branches have diverged.
Need to specify how to reconcile divergent branches.
So I used to have the same issue just whenever I would pull from my GitHubs because it just needed to. So I followed what Mike says, is you just do the top line where it says like git rebase like false, I believe, where it's just like the regular merge. I just did that one. I used to just do that one for every project, but then I did the global instead so that I don't have to do it every time.
Okay. Git rebase global.
So you did the git pull rebase false, and then you did the git pull origin master?
Yes.
Now it's telling me my local changes would be overwritten. Please commit your changes or stash them before you merge.
Yeah, try running just a git stash and then try pulling. But that's going to like overwrite your, like I said, if you try to pull now, it's going to, it's going to probably get rid of all your changes. If you want, I'm just saying, if you want to keep.
That's fine. I don't think I made any changes that are like, I'm getting an error that has a typo and I can't figure out what the typo is. So I don't mind abandoning everything I've done because it's everything you've done.
Yeah, just
But
try running a git stash. Technically, if you do a git stash, it will still, your changes will be there. There's a way to get them back.
so I did get stash and then I did get full origin master and now I'm getting an error that says the following untracked working tree files would be overwritten by the merge. Please move or remove them before you merge. So now I have to figure out how to remove these.
Yeah, I mean, you could try.
So now that's the only 4 things showing in my like to be saved thing. So is there a way to do that on VS Code?
To remove the files.
Or to like abandon?
If it's saying you have untracked files, you could just delete the files.
Oh, it's because it's the it's all the JavaScript files that we created in between.
Yeah. I wonder if you maybe do a git pull origin master force. No, I don't want to do that.
Okay. Merge failed. Plug. Now I don't know where I'm at. Conflict, merge conflict in DV seeds, merge conflicts in DV schema, merge conflicts in app controllers, and conflicts in app assets, style sheets, subs. So it's those other files that I change it. Fix conflicts and then commit the result. Maybe I should have just done that yellow stuff before.
No, it's, well, you're going to run into other issues too. If you're following, here's kind of like, if you're trying to follow along, you're not going to be able to really pull.
Okay.
Because that's like, because then you're getting like, it's not, you're going to run into so many conflicts.
I'm just going to clone it into a different thing.
Cool. Sweet. So let's do that. Let's take lunch. It's getting a little late. Let's come back at 2:20. And yeah, we'll go from there.